This one is the QRD Vortex F5. The company that makes this device is the QRD, and they were kind enough to send me this handheld for review. This model has the same chip RK3566 we've seen in other handhelds like the RG353V or the Powkiddy X55. And to be honest, I think this model competes directly with the Powkiddy X55. It's about the same size, the same screen, but it does have some extra features that I'm gonna tell you all about it. I'm Gilly from the Retro Oasis. Welcome to the Oasis. The unboxing is pretty straightforward. In the box, we have a little card with the layout and some shortcuts, a manual, the device itself, well, we're gonna see in a little while, and a USB-A to USB-C cable. As I said, this device has the chip RK3566 with 1 GB of RAM. The display is 5.5 inches IPS LCD and 720p resolution. It's got a 5000 mAh battery that will give you between 6 to 7 hours of gameplay. It's got some cool features like analog sticks with Hall sensors and some LED lights around it. For connections, we have a mini HDMI out so you can connect to your TV or monitor, and it does have Bluetooth if you want to connect an external controller. And it runs Linux. It's EmuELEC with emulation station. Going over the interface, we have the select and start here, and I like it when it's in this position. We have the two thumbsticks, they are like asymmetrical. We have the face buttons here, and it's the Nintendo style, the D-pad, a reset button, and here a home and a back button. On top, we have the shoulder buttons, a power button here, HDMI out, a grill for the exhaust vent, and the volume buttons. And nothing on the left, nothing on the right. And on the bottom, we have the two speakers here, and we have two SD card slots, two USB-C ports, but this one here is for peripherals, and this one here is for charging. And we have a headphone jack here. And nothing on the back, we just can see the battery here. Starting with the analog sticks, these are Hall sensors, as I said, but they are not the latest ones. Anbernic and Retroid has been using a new model, which is this one here, and it has a much more reach, and it pivots much better than the old ones. To be honest, this one here is the same used on the RG556, which it doesn't have as much reach. But honestly, you can't complain. Just the fact that you have Hall sensors in a device that's around $100, that's not bad. Yes, this one doesn't have as much reach, but it's pretty good for the games you're gonna play here. And also, it's very smooth, and it doesn't offer too much resistance. Now, let's talk about the D-pad, and I do have some mixed feelings about it. This D-pad is super smooth, and I mean really smooth. It really doesn't offer too much resistance. I'm personally more used to D-pads like this one, you know, PS Vita inspired, or something more traditional like the RG406V. It's something like very traditional like this one. And I have to tell you, both of these D-pads has more resistance than this one here. And I think that's the reason it took me a little while to get used to this one. And the fact that this one, when you press it and it stays flush with the shell, it doesn't help very much. I mean, nothing wrong with it. Whatever I press it, it computes fine. It's just I'm not used to it. I'd rather had a little bit more elevation here. And even though I don't like this D-pad, you can see I can do the moves without issues. I think it's something that you just need to get used to it. Now the face buttons, they are exactly what you expect on a retro handheld. They're actually pretty similar to what you can find on an Anbernic or a Retroid device. I think they offer the right amount of resistance, and when you press it, they stay a little bit above the shell. Just a quick comparison, they have 7.7 millimeters. If you compare with an Anbernic device, for example, we have a 7.5, though it's pretty similar. And the Retroid Pocket 5, let's see, 7.2. Okay, so this one here, it's around the same size as the other ones. Now the shoulder buttons are all digital input. It's something pretty similar you find on a Powkiddy X55. So no, you won't find any pressure sensitive triggers here. Both the bumpers and the triggers are very clicky with that characteristic sound. They're quite stiff, especially the trigger here, and they have a very short travel. Moving on to build quality, this one obviously it's not a premium device, but I actually think it's really well built. I actually think the build quality here is much better than the Powkiddy X55. Everything fits really well here. There's no gaps, no edges, nothing. I did have a problem with my Powkiddy X55 where this part here, it would not fit together. You know, the shell would not close properly. And I do not have that problem here. Everything fits really well. I think as you use the device, you can see some stains here, but they're just natural stains from, you know, the oil of your hands. But since the plastic here is matte, you don't see it very often. It's just sometimes you can see it. Now about the ergonomics, the Vortex F5, it's really good. Your hands fit perfectly on this device. To be honest, the ergonomics of this device reminds me of the RG556. Of course, this is a premium device, but the ergonomics here are out of this world. I think this one is even better because the right analog stick is very close here to the face buttons. And when you hold it like this, because the analog stick is a little bit higher, you don't bend your finger here, your thumb too much. On the Vortex F5, the analog stick is a little bit more on the bottom, so when you hold it, you have to bend a little bit more your thumb. But I think in a device like this, that's not like really powerful, you know, it's more focused on retro games, I think the D-pad should be up here. It's just a little bit better in terms of gameplay, but honestly, I don't have any problems using the D-pad over here. I think the ergonomics of this device are phenomenal and I can use it for hours without any issues. About the size, around 22.5 centimeters in length, 10.5 centimeters in height, and a little more than 3 centimeters thick. Here you can compare with other devices. Now let's have a look at the display. And unfortunately, I don't have a Powkiddy X55 with me anymore because I think it would be the device perfect for this comparison. I had to sell mine because, you know, I needed more money to invest in more devices like this. So to compare, I'll have the Embernic RG40XX and the Embernic RG556 because I think it's not even fair because this one has an OLED screen. And with the three devices side by side, we can see the brightness level of the 556 it's much better than the other two. And between those two, they're actually very similar. I can't really tell the difference between those two. I had to lower the brightness of the 556, otherwise the colors, it wouldn't show right. You know, like it's not the same through the lens of the camera. And I can tell you, looking with a naked eye, you can see that the colors on the 556 are much better. You would expect that being an OLED screen. You can see here on the grass, the green and the red on the enemy, because everything looks a lot more vivid and saturated on the 556. And it's the same thing when you compare with the 40XXH. You know, everything looks much better on the OLED screen. Now, everything is a little bit more fair when you compare those two devices together. The 40XXH has a 480p resolution screen, while the Vortex F5 is 720p. But I want to see the difference in colors, not the resolution. And it's quite easy to see that the Vortex F5 has an edge here in colors. The 40XX has the colors a little bit more, you know, yellowish. Now if you compare, look at the grass, the green here in both devices. It's much better on the Vortex F5. In my opinion, the Vortex F5 has a clear win over this one. Alright, let's talk a bit about the software. This firmware, the MULAC, it's very similar to others like the ArcOS for example, and it runs with Emulation Station on top of it. And it's pretty straightforward, you just choose a system and press A on top of the game so you can start playing. And this is great if you don't want the hassle to download games and configure all the emulators, you know, you just turn on and start playing. So if you press start and you go down to LED settings, you can change the lights here around the thumbsticks. But basically you can only do white and orange. That's it. You have the option to put like breath white and breath orange, but that's it. That's all you're gonna get over here. Also in this menu, you can go to system settings and you can change the language to another one of your preference. This device came configured so all games start in full screen, a 16:9 aspect ratio. But of course, there are systems like the original Game Boy that the ratio is 1:1, so it doesn't look quite right. I don't like the image being stretched like that. If you want to change that in the main screen, you just press start, go to game settings, and here, game aspect ratio, you change to core provided. And when you start a game, it goes to the original ratio 1:1, like the original Game Boy. Another thing you can do in this menu here is go to game settings and here, enable RA retro arch bezels, and then you put on. Now you can see the bezels that, it's supposed to look like the original Game Boy. But of course, you're gonna lose a little bit of screen real estate here, so it's up to you. You can lose a little bit of screen real estate and make the device look a little bit more retro, or you can play the way it was before, but you have a little bit more space. And all systems 8, 16, and 32 bits will run flawlessly here. Game Boy Advance looks really good here because it has a 3:2 aspect ratio, which is a little bit more widescreen, and it looks amazing on this screen. The original PlayStation is a system that will run perfectly on this device. Nintendo DS also runs really well, and since you have a widescreen display, you can easily put the two screens side by side, which in my opinion is much better than one on top of the other. For Dreamcast, depending on the game you're starting, it might be a little slow, as you can see here. But if you go into the settings and add a frame skip, you can play just fine. And you won't have any problems to play Nintendo 64 here. And PSP is the limit of this handheld. Some games will run just fine, but other games like God of War, for example, you need to add frame skip to make it more playable. The QRD Vortex F5 is a good device in my opinion, but of course it's not perfect. Even though the D-pad is quite responsive, I think it's too soft in my opinion, and it could be raised a little bit more here. And the shoulder buttons, I think they're a bit too stiff for a handheld device. It could be a little bit softer. But for $100 with shipping included, I don't think you can complain too much. And you can argue that the Powkiddy X55 has the same screen and basically the same specs of this one and is a little bit cheaper. But for about $20 more, you have thumbsticks with Hall sensors, you have a better ergonomy than the X55, a bigger battery, 5000 mAh against 4000 of the X55, and that will give you alone about an hour and a half of gameplay. And I know most people don't care about that, but you do have the RGB lights around the thumbsticks. Not even RGB lights, it's just LED lights. If you thought this device is interesting, I think you should check this video over here. But before that, like, subscribe, and follow us.